Chapter 13 of The Italian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marty Chris. The Italian by Ann Radcliffe. Chapter 13. Thus sang the unlettered swain to the oaks and rills, while the still morn went forth with sandals gray. And now the sun had stretched out all the hills, and now was dropped into the western bay. Milton. From the summit of a mountain, the morning light shewed the travelers the distant lake of Solano, gleaming at the feet of other lofty mountains of the Apennine, far in the south. Thither Vivaldi judged it prudent to direct his course, for the lake lay so remote from the immediate way to Naples and from the neighborhood of San Stefano that its banks promised a secure retreat. He considered also that among the convents scattered along those delightful banks might easily be found a priest who would solemnize their nuptials should Elena consent to an immediate marriage. The travelers descended among the olive woods, and soon after were directed by some peasants at work into a road that leads from Aquila to the town of Solano, one of the very few roads which intrudes among the wild mountains that on every side sequester the lake. As they approached the low grounds, the scent of orange blossoms breathed upon the morning air, and the spicy myrtle sent forth all its fragrance from among the cliffs, which it thickly tufted. Bowers of lemon and orange spread along the valley, and among the cabins of the peasants who cultivated them, Vivaldi hoped to obtain repose and refreshment for Elena. The cottages, however, at which Paolo inquired were unoccupied, the owners being all gone forth to their labor, and the travelers again ascending found themselves soon after among mountains inhabited by the flocks, where the scent of the orange was exchanged for the aromatic perfume of the pasturage. "My signor," said Paolo, "is not that a shepherd's horn sounding at a distance? If so, the signora may yet obtain some refreshment." While Vivaldi listened, a hautboy and a pastoral drum were heard considerably nearer. They followed the sound over the turf, and came within view of a cabin, sheltered from the sun by a tuft of almond trees. It was a dairy cabin belonging to some shepherds, who at a short distance were watching their flocks, and, stretched beneath the shade of chestnuts, were amusing themselves by playing upon these rural instruments, a scene of Arcadian manners frequent at this day upon the mountains of Abruzzo. The simplicity of their appearance approaching to wildness was tempted by a hospitable spirit. A venerable man, the chief shepherd, advanced to meet the strangers, and learning their wants, conducted them into his cool cabin, where cream, cheese made of goat's milk, honey extracted from the delicious herbage of the mountains, and dried figs were quickly placed before them. Elena, overcome with the fatigue of anxiety rather than that of traveling, retired, when she had taken breakfast, for an hour's repose, while Vivaldi rested on the bench before the cottage, and Paolo, keeping watch, discussed his breakfast, together with the circumstances of the late alarm, under the shade of the almond trees. When Elena again appeared, Vivaldi proposed that they should rest here during the intense heat of the day, and since he now considered her to be in a place of temporary safety, he ventured to renew the subject nearest his heart, to represent the evils that might overtake them, and to urge an immediate solemnization of their marriage. Thoughtful and dejected, Elena attended for some time in silence to the arguments and pleadings of Vivaldi. She secretly acknowledged the justness of his representations, but she shrunk more than ever from the indelicacy, the degradation of intruding herself into his family, a family, too, from whom she had not only received proofs of strong dislike, but had suffered terrible injustice, and had been menaced with still severer cruelty. These latter circumstances, however, released her from all obligations of delicacy or generosity so far as concerned only the authors of her suffering, and she had now but to consider the happiness of Vivaldi and herself. Yet she could not decide thus precipitately on a subject which so solemnly involved the fortune of her whole life, nor forbear reminding Vivaldi, affectionately, gratefully as she loved him, of the circumstances which withheld her decision. "Tell me yourself," said she, "whether I ought to give my hand while your family, your mother—" She paused, and blushed, and burst into tears. "Spare me the view of those tears," said Vivaldi, "and a recollection of the circumstances that excite them. Oh, let me not think of my mother while I see you weep. Let me not remember that her injustice and cruelty destine you to perpetual sorrow." Vivaldi's features became slightly convulsed while he spoke. He rose, paced the room with quick steps, and then quitted it, and walked under the shade of the trees in front of the cabin. In a few moments, however, he commanded his emotion and returned. Again he placed himself on the bench beside Elena, and taking her hand, said solemnly in a voice of extreme sensibility, "Elena, you have long witnessed how dear you are to me. You cannot doubt my love. You have long since promised, solemnly promised, in the presence of her who is now no more, but whose spirit may even at this moment look down upon us, of her who bequeathed you to my tenderest care, to be mine forever. By these sacred truths, by these affecting recollections, I conjure you, abandon me not to despair, nor in the energy of a just resentment sacrifice the son to the cruel and mistaken policy of the mother. You nor I can conjecture the machinations which may be spread for us when it shall be known that you have left San Stefano. If we delay to exchange our vows, I know and I feel that you are lost to me forever." Elena was affected, and for some moments unable to reply. At length, drying her tears, she said tenderly, "Resentment can have no more influence on my conduct towards you. I think I feel none towards the Marchesa, for she is your mother. But pride, insulted pride, has a right to dictate and ought to be obeyed, and the time is now, perhaps, arrived when, if I would respect myself, I must renounce you." "Renounce me!" interrupted Vivaldi. "Renounce me! And is it then possible you could renounce me?" he repeated, his eyes still fixed upon her face with eagerness and consternation. "Tell me at once, Elena, is it possible?" "I fear it is not," she replied. "You fear? Alas! If you fear, it is too possible, and I have lost you already. Oh, say but that you hope it is not, and I too will hope again." The anguish with which he uttered this awakened all her tenderness, and forgetting the reserve she had imposed upon herself, and every half-formed resolution, she said with a smile of ineffable sweetness, "I will neither fear nor hope in this instance. I will obey the dictates of gratitude, of affection, and will believe that I can never renounce you while you are unchanged." "Believe," repeated Vivaldi, "only believe. And why that mention of gratitude, and why that unnecessary reservation? Yet even this assurance, feebly as it sustains my hopes, is extorted. You see my misery, and from pity, from gratitude, not affection, would assuage it. Besides, you will neither fear nor hope. Ah, Elena, did love ever yet exist without fear, and without hope? Oh, never, never! I fear and hope with such rapid transition. Every assurance, every look of yours gives such force either to the one or to the other, that I suffer unceasing anxiety. Why, too, that cold, that heart-breaking mention of gratitude? No, Elena, it is too certain that you do not love me. My mother's cruelty has estranged your heart from me." "How much you mistake," said Elena. "You have already received sacred testimonies of my regard. If you doubt their sincerity, pardon me if I so far respect myself as to forbear entreating you will believe them." "How calm, how indifferent, how circumspect, how prudent!" exclaimed Vivaldi in tones of mournful reproach. "But I will not distress you. Forgive me for renewing this subject at this time. It was my intention to be silent till you should have reached a place of more permanent security than this. But how was it possible, with such anxiety pressing upon my heart, to persevere in that design? And what have I gained by departing from it? Increase of anxiety, of doubt, of fear?" "Why will you persist in such self-inflictions?" said Elena. "I cannot endure that you should doubt my affection even for a moment. And how can you suppose it possible that I can ever become insensible of yours? that I can ever forget the imminent danger you have voluntarily incurred for my release, or remembering it, can cease to feel the warmest gratitude." "That is the very word which tortures me beyond all others," said Vivaldi. "Is it then only a sense of obligation you own for me? Oh, rather say you hate me than suffer me to deceive my hopes with assurances of a sentiment so cold, so circumscribed, so dutiful as that of gratitude." "With me the word has a very different acceptation," replied Helena, smiling. "I understand it to imply all that is tender and generous in affection, and the sense of duty which you say it includes is one of the sweetest and most sacred feelings of the human heart." "Ah, Helena, I am too willing to be deceived to examine your definition rigorously, yet I believe it is your smile rather than the accuracy of your explanation that persuades me to a confidence in your affection, and I will trust that the gratitude you feel is thus tender and comprehensive. But I beseech you, name the word no more. Its sound is like the touch of the torpedo. I perceive my confidence chilled even when I listen to my own pronunciation of it." The entrance of Paolo interrupted the conversation, who, advancing with an air of mystery and alarm, said in a low voice, "Signor, as I kept watch under the almond trees, who should I see mounting up the road from the valley yonder but the 2 barefooted Carmelites that overtook us in the pass of Chiari. I lost them again behind the woods, but I dare say they are coming this way. For the moment they spy out this dairy hut, they will guess something good is to be had here, and the shepherds would believe their flocks would all die if—" "I see them coming at this moment, emerging from the woods," said Vivaldi. "And now they are leaving the road and crossing this way. Where is our host, Paolo?" "He is without a little distance, signor. Shall I call him?" "Yes," replied Vivaldi. "Or stay, I will call him myself. Yet if they see me—" "Ay, signor, or for that matter, if they see me. But we cannot help ourselves now, for if we call the host, we shall betray ourselves, and if we do not call him, he will betray us. So they must find us out, be as it may." "Peace, peace, let me think a moment," said Vivaldi. While Vivaldi undertook to think, Paolo was peeping about for a hiding place, if occasion should require one. "Call our host immediately," said Vivaldi. "I must speak with him." "He passes the lattice at this instant," said Helena. Paolo obeyed, and the shepherd entered the cabin. "My good friend," said Vivaldi, "I must entreat that you will not admit those friars whom you see coming this way, nor suffer them to know what guests you have. They have been very troublesome to us already on the road. I will reward you for any loss their sudden departure may occasion you." "Nay, for that matter, friend," said Paolo, "it is their visit only that can occasion your loss. Begging the signor's pardon, their departure never occasioned loss to anybody. And to tell you the truth, for my master will not speak out, we were obliged to look pretty sharply about us while they bore us company, or we have reason to think our pockets would have been the lighter. They are designing people, friend, take my word for it. Banditti, perhaps in disguise. The dress of a Carmelite would suit their purpose at this time of the pilgrimage. So be pretty blunt with them if they want to come in here, and you will do well when they go to send somebody to watch which way they take, and see them clear off, or you may lose a stray lamb, perhaps." The old shepherd lifted up his eyes and hands. "To see how the world goes," said he. "But thank you, maestro, for your warning. They shall not come within my threshold for all their holy seeming, and it's the first time in my life I ever said nay to one of their garb, and mine has been a pretty long one, as you may guess, perhaps by my face. How old, signor, should you take me to be?" "I warrant you will guess short of the matter, though, for on these high mountains—" "I will guess when you have dismissed the travelers," said Vivaldi, after having given them some hasty refreshment without. "They must almost be at the door by this time. Dispatch, friend." "If they should fall foul upon me for refusing them entrance," said the shepherd, You will come out to help me, signor? For my lads are at some distance. Vivaldi assured him that they would, and he left the cabin. Paolo ventured to peep at the lattice on what might be going forward without. "They are gone round to the door, signor, I fancy," said he, "for I see nothing of them this way. If there was but another window! What foolish people to build a cottage with no window near the door! But I must listen." He stepped on tiptoe to the door and bent his head in attention. "They are certainly spies from the monastery," said Elena to Vivaldi. "They follow us so closely. If they were pilgrims, it is improbable, too, that their way should be through this unfrequented region, and still more so, that they should not travel in a larger party. When my absence was discovered, these people were sent, no doubt, in pursuit of me, and having met the devotees whom we passed, they were enabled to follow our route." "We shall do well to act upon this supposition," replied Vivaldi. "But though I am inclined to believe them emissaries from San Stefano, it is not improbable that they are only Carmelites returning to some convent on the lake of Solano." "I cannot hear a syllable, signor," said Paolo. "Pray do listen yourself, and there is not a single chink in this door to afford one consolation. Well, if ever I build a cottage, there shall be a window near. Listen," said Vivaldi. "Not a single word, signor," cried Paolo after a pause. "I do not even hear a voice. But now I hear steps, and they are coming to the door, too. They shall find it no easy matter to open it, though," he added, placing himself against it. "Aye, aye, you may knock, friend, till your arm aches, and kick and lay about you. No matter for that." "Silence! Let me know who it is," said Vivaldi, and the old shepherd's voice was heard without.
"They are gone, signors," said he. "You may open the door."
"Which way did they go?" asked Vivaldi, when the man entered.
"I cannot say as to that, signor, because I did not happen to see them at all, and I have been looking all about, too."
"Why, I saw them myself, crossing this way from the wood yonder," said Paolo. "And there is nothing to shelter them from our view between the wood and this cottage, friend," added Vivaldi. "What can they have done with themselves?"
"For that matter, gone into the wood again, perhaps," said the shepherd.
Paolo gave his master a significant look, and added, "It is likely enough, friend, and you may do well upon it if they are lurking there for no good purpose. You will do well to send somebody to look after them. Your flocks will suffer for it else. Depend upon it, they design no good."
"We are not used to such sort of folks in these parts," replied the shepherd, "but if they mean any harm, they shall find we can help ourselves."
As he concluded, he took down a horn from the roof, and blew a shrill blast that made the mountains echo, when immediately the younger shepherds were seen running from various quarters towards the cottage. "Do not be alarmed, friend," said Vivaldi. "These travelers mean you no harm, I dare say, whatever they may design against us. But as I think them suspicious persons, and should not like to overtake them on the road, I will reward one of your lads if you will let them go a little ways towards Solano, and examine whether they are lurking on that road." The old man consented, and the shepherds came up. One of them received directions from Vivaldi. "And be sure you do not return till you have found them," added Paolo. "No, master," replied the lad, "and I will bring them safe here, you may trust me." "If you do, friend, you will get your head broke for your trouble. You are only to discover where they are, and to watch where they go," said Paolo. Vivaldi at length made the lad comprehend what was required of him, and he departed, while the old shepherd went out to keep guard. The time of his absence was passed in various conjectures by the party in the cabin concerning the Carmelites. Vivaldi still inclined to believe they were honest people returning from a pilgrimage, but Paolo was decidedly against this opinion. "They are waiting for us on the road, you may depend on it, signor," said the latter. "You may be certain that they have some great design in hand, or they would never have turned their steps from this dairy house when once they had spied it, and that they did spy it we are sure." "But if they have in hand the great design you speak of, Paolo," said Vivaldi, It is probable that they have spied us also by their taking this obscure road. Now it must have occurred to them when they saw a dairy hut in so solitary a region that we might probably be found within. Yet they have not examined. It appears, therefore, they have no design against us. What can you answer to this, Paolo? I trust the apprehensions of Signora di Rosalba are unfounded.
Why, do you suppose, signor, they would attack us when we were safe housed and had these good shepherds to lend us a helping hand? No, signor, they would not even have shewn themselves if they could have helped it, and being once sure we were here, they would skulk back to the woods and lurk for us in the road they knew we must go, since, as it happens, there is only one.
How is it possible, said Elena, that they can have discovered us here, since they did not approach the cabin to inquire?
They came near enough for their purpose, signor, I dare say, and if the truth were known, they spied my face looking at them through the lattice.
Come, come, said Vivaldi, you are an ingenious tormentor indeed, Paolo. Do you suppose they saw enough of thy face last night by moonlight in that dusky glen to enable them to recollect it again at a distance of 40 yards? Revive, my Elena. I think every appearance is in our favor. Would I could think so too, said she with a sigh.
Oh, for that matter, signor, rejoined Paolo, there is nothing to be afraid of. They should find tough work of it if they thought proper to attack us, lady.
It is not an open attack that we have to fear, replied Elena, but they may surround us with their snares and defy resistance. However Vivaldi might accede to the truth of this remark, he would not appear to do so, but tried to laugh away her apprehensions, and Paolo was silenced for a while by a significant look from his master. The shepherd's boy returned much sooner than they had expected, and he probably saved his time that he might spare his labor, for he brought no intelligence of the Carmelites.
I looked for them among the woods along the roadside in the hollow yonder, too, said the lad, and then I mounted the hill further on, but I could see nothing of them far or near, nor of a single soul, except our goats, and some of them do stray wide enough. Sometimes they lead me a fine dance often. They sometimes, signor, have wandered as far as Monte Nuvola yonder, and go to the top of it, up among the clouds and the crags, where I should break my neck if I climbed. And the rogues seem to know it, too, for when they have seen me coming scrambling up, pussing and blowing, they have ceased their capering, and stood peeping over a crag, so fly and so quiet it seemed as if they were laughing at me, as much to say, "Catch us if you can."
Vivaldi, who during the latter part of this speech had been consulting with Elena whether they should proceed on their way immediately, asked the boy some further questions concerning the Carmelites, and becoming convinced that they had either not taken the road to Solano, or having taken it, were at a considerable distance, he proposed setting out and proceeding leisurely. "For I have now little apprehension of these people," he added, "and a great deal lest night should overtake us before we reach the place of our destination, since the road is mountainous and wild, and further, we are not perfectly acquainted with it." Elena approving the plan, they took leave of the good shepherd, who could with difficulty be prevailed with to accept any recompense for his trouble, and who gave them some further directions as to the road, and their way was long cheered by the sound of the tabor and the sweetness of the hautboy wafted over the wild. When they descended into the woody hollow mentioned by the boy, Elena sent forth many an anxious look beneath the deep shade, while Paolo, sometimes silent, and at others whistling and singing loudly, as if to overcome his fears, peeped under every bough that crossed the road, expecting to discover his friends the Carmelites lurking within its gloom. Having emerged from this valley, the road lay over mountains covered with phlox, for it was now the season when they had quitted the plains of Apulia to feed upon the herbage for which this region is celebrated, and it was near sunset, when from a summit to which the travellers had long been ascending, the whole lake of Solano, with its vast circle of mountains, burst at once upon their view.
"Ah, signor," exclaimed Paolo, "what a prospect is here! It reminds me of home. It is almost as pleasant as the Bay of Naples. I should never love it like that, though, if it were 100 times finer."
The travellers stopped to admire the scene, and to give their horses rest after the labor of the ascent. The evening sun, shooting athwart a clear expanse of water, between 18 and 20 leagues in circumference, lighted up all the towns and villages, and towered castles, and spiry convents, that enriched the rising shores, brought out all the various tints of cultivation, and colored with beamy purple the mountains which on every side formed the majestic background of the landscape. Vivaldi pointed out to Elena the gigantic Valino in the north, a barrier mountain between the territories of Rome and Naples. Its peaked head towered far above every neighboring summit, and its white precipices were opposed to the verdant points of the Magella, snow-crowned, and next in altitude, loved by the Sacs. Westward, near the woody hills, and rising immediately from the lake, appeared Monte Saviano, covered with wild sage, as its name imports, and once pompous with forests of chestnuts. A branch of the Apennine extended to meet it. "See," said Vivaldi, "where Monte Corno stands like a ruffian, huge, feared, threatening, and horrid, and in the north, where the sullen mountain of San Nicolo shoots up, barren and rocky. From in hence, mark how other overtopping ridges of the mighty Apennine darken the horizon far along the east, and to circle approach the Veinen the north. Mark, too," said Elena, "how sweetly the banks and undulating plains repose at the feet of the mountains. What an image of beauty and elegance they oppose to the awful grandeur that overlooks and guards them. Observe, too, how many a delightful valley opening from the lake spreads its rice and cornfields, shaded with groves of the almond far among the winding hills. How gaily vineyards and olives alternately checker the acclivities, and how gracefully the lofty palms bend over the higher cliffs." "Ay, signore," exclaimed Paolo, "and have the goodness to observe how like are the fishing boats that sail towards the hamlet below to those one sees upon the Bay of Naples. They are worth all the rest of the prospect, except indeed this fine sheet of water, which is almost as good as the bay, and that mountain with its sharp head, which is almost as good as Vesuvius, if it would but throw out fire." "We must despair of finding a mountain in this neighborhood so good as to do that, Paolo," said Vivaldi, smiling at this stroke of nationality, "though perhaps many that we now see have once been volcanic." "I honor them for that, signor, and look at them with double satisfaction. But our mountain is the only mountain in the world. Oh, to see it of a dark night! What a blazing it makes! And what a height it will shoot to! And what a light it throws over the sea! No other mountain can do so. It seems as if the waves were all on fire. I have seen the reflection as far off as Capri, trembling all across the gulf, and shewing every vessel as plain as at noonday. Ay, and every sailor on the deck. You never saw such a light, signor." "Why do you indeed seem to have forgotten that I ever did, Paolo, and also that a volcano can do any mischief? But let us return, Elena, to the scene before us. Yonder, a mile or two within the shore, is the town of Solano, whither we are going." The clearness of an Italian atmosphere permitted him to discriminate the minute though very distant features of the landscape, and on an eminence rising from the plains of a valley opening to the west, he pointed out the modern Alba, crowned with the ruins of its ancient castle, still visible upon the splendor of the horizon, the prison and tomb of many a prince, who, fallen from his high estate, was sent from imperial Rome to finish here the sad reverse of his days, to gaze from the bars of his tower upon solitudes where beauty or grandeur administered no assuaging feelings to him, whose life had passed amidst the intrigues of the world and the feverish contentions of disappointed ambition, to him with whom reflection brought only remorse, and anticipation despair, whom no horizontal beam enlivened in the crimson evening of life's dusty day. "And to such a scene as this," said Vivaldi, "a Roman emperor came only for the purpose of witnessing the most barbarous exhibition, to indulge the most savage delights. Here Claudius celebrated the accomplishment of his arduous work, an aqueduct to carry the overflowing waters of the Solano to Rome.
by a naval fight in which hundreds of wretched slaves perished for his amusement. Its pure and polished surface was stained with human blood, and roughened by the plunging bodies of the slain, while the gilded galleys of the emperor floated gaily around. And these beautiful shores were made to echo with applauding yells worthy of the Furies. "We scarcely dare to trust the truth of history in some of its traits of human nature," said Elena. "Signor," cried Paolo, "I have been thinking that while we are taking the air so much at our ease here, those Carmelites may be spying at us from some hole or corner that we know nothing of, and may swoop upon us all of a sudden, before we can help ourselves. Had we not better go on, signor?" "Our horses are perhaps sufficiently rested," replied Vivaldi. "But if I had not long since dismissed all suspicion of the evil intention of those strangers, I should not willingly have stopped for a moment." "But pray let us proceed," said Elena. "Ay, signora, it is best to be of the safe side," observed Paolo. "Yonder below is Solano, and I hope we shall get safe housed there before it is quite dark, for we have no mountain that will light us on our way. Ah, if we were but within 20 miles of Naples now, and it was an illumination night!" As they descended the mountain, Elena, silent and dejected, abandoned herself to reflection. She was too sensible of the difficulties of her present situation, and too apprehensive of the influence which her determination must have on all her future life, to be happy, though escaped from the prison of San Stefano, and in the presence of Vivaldi, her beloved deliverer and protector. He observed her dejection with grief, and, not understanding all the finer scruples that distressed her, interpreted her reserve into indifference towards himself. But he forbore to disturb her again with a mention of his doubts or fears, and he determined not to urge the subject of his late entreaties till he should have placed her in some secure asylum, where she might feel herself at perfect liberty to accept or reject his proposal. By accepting with an honor so delicate, he unconsciously adopted a certain means of increasing her esteem and gratitude, and deserved them the more, since he had to endure the apprehension of losing her by the delay thus occasioned to their nuptials. They reached the town of Solano before the evening closed, when Vivaldi was requested by Elena to inquire for a convent where she might be lodged for the night. He left her at the inn with Paolo for her guard, and proceeded on his search. The first gate he knocked upon belonged to a convent of Carmelites. It appeared probable that the pilgrims of that order, who had occasioned him so much disquietude, were honest brothers of this house, but as it was probable also that they were emissaries of the abbess of San Stefano, and came to Solano, they would take up their lodging with a society of their own class, in preference to that of any other. Vivaldi thought it prudent to retire from their gates without making himself known. He passed on, therefore, and soon after arrived at a convent of Dominicans, where he learned that there were only 2 houses of nuns in Solano, and that these admitted no other boarders than permanent ones. Vivaldi returned with this intelligence to Elena, who endeavored to reconcile herself to the necessity of remaining where she was. But Paolo, ever active and zealous, brought intelligence that a little fishing town at some distance on the bank of the lake was a convent of Ursulines, remarkable for their hospitality to strangers. The obscurity of so remote a place was another reason for preferring it to Solano, and Vivaldi proposing to remove thither, if Elena was not too weary to proceed, she readily assented, and they immediately set off. "It happens to be a fine night," said Paolo as they left Solano, "and so, signor, we cannot well lose our way. Besides, they say, there is but one. The town we are going to lies yonder on the edge of the lake, about 1.5 miles off. I think I can see a gray steeple or two a little to the right of that wood where the water gleams so." "No, Paolo," replied Vivaldi, after looking attentively. "I perceive what you mean, but those are not the points of steeples. They are only the tops of some tall cypresses." "Pardon me, signor. They are too tapering for trees. That must surely be the town. This road, however, will lead us right, for there is no other to puzzle us, as they say." "This cool and balmy air revives me," said Elena. "And what a soothing shade prevails over the scene! How softened, yet how distinct is every near object! How sweetly dubious the more removed ones! While the mountains beyond character themselves sublimely upon the still glowing horizon."
"Observe, too," said Vivaldi, "how their broken summits, tipped with the beams that have set to our lower region, exhibit the portraiture of towers and castles and embattled ramparts, which seem designed to guard them against the enemies that may come by the clouds."
"Yes," replied Elena, "the mountains themselves display a sublimity that seems to belong to a higher world. Their besiegers ought not to be of this earth. They can only be spirits of the air." "They can be nothing else, Signore," said Paolo, "for nothing of this earth can reach them. See, lady, they have some of the qualities of your spirits, too. See how they change their shapes and colors as the sunbeams sink, and now how gray and dim they grow. See but how fast they vanish."
"Everything reposes," said Vivaldi, "who would willingly travel in the day, when Italy has such nights as this."
"Signor, that is the town before us," said Paolo, "for now I can discern plain enough the spires of convents, and there goes a light. Ha, ha! And there is a bell, too, chiming from one of the spires. The monks are going to mass. Would we were going to supper, signor."
"That chime is nearer than the place you point to, Paolo, and I doubt whether it comes from the same quarter."
"Hark, signor! The air wafts the sound, and now it is gone again."
"Yes, I believe you are right, Paolo, and that we have not far to go." The travelers descended the gradual slopes toward the shore, and Paolo some time after exclaimed,
"See, signor, where another light glides along. See, it is reflected on the lake." "I hear the faint dashing of waves now," said Elena, "and the sound of oars, too. But observe, Paolo, the light is not in the town. It is in the boat that moves yonder."
"Now it retreats and trembles in a lengthening line upon the waters," said Vivaldi. "We have been too ready to believe what we wish, and have yet far to go." The shore they were approaching formed a spacious bay for the lake immediately below. Dark woods seemed to spread along the banks and ascend among the cultivated slopes towards the mountains, except where here and there cliffs bending over the water were distinguished through the twilight by the whiteness of their limestone precipices. Within the bay the town became gradually visible. Lights twinkled between the trees, appearing and vanishing like the stars of a cloudy night, and at length was heard the melancholy song of boatmen who were fishing near the shore. Other sounds soon after struck the ear.
"Oh, what merry notes!" exclaimed Paolo. "They make my heart dance. See, signora, there is a group footing it away so gaily on the bank of the lake yonder by those trees. Oh, what a merry set! Would I were among them. That is, I mean, if you, maestro, and the signora were not here."
"Well corrected, Paolo." "It is a festival, I fancy," observed Vivaldi. "These peasants of the lake can make the moments sly as gaily as the voluptuaries of the city, it seems."
"Oh, what merry music!" repeated Paolo. "Ah, how often I have footed it as joyously on the beach at Naples after sunset of a fine night like this, with such a pleasant fresh breeze to cool one. Ah, there are none like the fishermen of Naples for a dance by moonlight. How lightly they do trip it! Oh, if I was but there now! That is, I mean, if you, maestro, and signora were there too. Oh, what merry notes!"
"We thank you, good Signor Paolo," said Vivaldi, "and I trust we shall all be there soon, when you shall trip it away with as joyous a heart as the best of them." The travelers now entered the town, which consisted of one street straggling along the margin of the lake, and having inquired for the Ursuline convent, were directed to its gates. The portress appeared immediately upon the ringing of the bell, and carried a message to the abbess, who as quickly returned an invitation to Elena. She alighted, and followed the portress to the parlor, while Vivaldi remained at the gate, till he should know whether she approved of her new lodging. A second invitation induced him also to alight. He was admitted to the grate and offered refreshment, which, however, he declined staying to accept, as he had yet a lodging to seek for the night. The abbess, on learning the circumstance, courteously recommended him to a neighboring society of Benedictines, and desired him to mention her name to the abbot. Vivaldi then took leave of Elena, and though it was only for a few hours, he left her with dejection, and with some degree of apprehension for her safety, which, though circumstances could not justify him in admitting, he could not entirely subdue. She shared his dejection, but not his fears, when the door closed after him, and she found herself once more among strangers. The forlornness of her feelings could not be entirely overcome by the attentions of the abbess, and there was a degree of curiosity, and even of scrutiny, expressed in the looks of some of the sisters, which seemed more than was due to a stranger. From such examination she eagerly escaped to the apartment allotted for her, and to the repose from which she had so long been withheld. Vivaldi, meanwhile, had found a hospitable reception with the Benedictines, whose sequestered situation made the visit of a stranger a pleasurable novelty to them. In the eagerness of conversation, and yielding to the satisfaction which the mind receives from exercising ideas that have long slept in dusky indolence, and to the pleasure of admitting new ones, the abbot and a few of the brothers sat with Vivaldi to a late hour. When at length the traveller was suffered to retire, other subjects than those which had interested his host engaged his thoughts, and he resolved the means of preventing the misery that threatened him in a serious separation from Elena. Now that she was received into a respectable asylum, every motive for silence upon this topic was done away. He determined, therefore, that on the following morning he would urge all his reasons and entreaties for an immediate marriage, and among the brothers of the Benedictine he had little doubt of prevailing with one to solemnize the nuptials, which he believed would place his happiness and Elena's peace beyond the influence of malignant possibilities. End of chapter 13. Reading by Marty Chris. Chapter 14 of the Italian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marty Chris. The Italian by Ann Radcliffe. Chapter 14. I, under fair pretence of friendly ends, and well-placed words of glozing courtesy, baited with reasons not unplausible, wind me into the easy-hearted man, and hug him into snares. Milton. While Vivaldi and Elena were on the way from San Stefano, the Marchese Vivaldi was suffering the utmost vexation respecting his son, and the Marchesa felt not less apprehension that the abode of Elena might be discovered. Yet this fear did not withhold her from mingling in all the gaieties of Naples. Her assemblies were, as usual, among the most brilliant of that voluptuous city, and she patronized as zealously as before the strains of her favorite composer. Notwithstanding this perpetual dissipation, her thoughts frequently withdrew themselves from the scene and dwelt on gloomy forebodings of disappointed pride. A circumstance which rendered her particularly susceptible to such disappointment at this time was that overtures of alliance had been lately made to the Marquise by the father of a lady who was held suitable in every consideration to become his daughter, and whose wealth rendered the union particularly desirable at a time when the expenses of such an establishment as was necessary to the vanity of the Marchesa considerably exceeded his income, large as it was. The Marchesa's temper has been thus irritated by the contemplation of her son's conduct in an affair which so materially affected the fortune, and, as she believed, the honor of his family, when a courier from the abyss of San Stefano brought intelligence of the flight of Elena with Vivaldi. She was in a disposition which heightened disappointment into fury, and she forfeited, by the transports to which she yielded, the degree of pity that otherwise was due to a mother who believed her only son to have sacrificed his family and himself to an unworthy passion. She believed that he was now married and irrevocably lost. Scarcely able to endure the agony of this conviction, she sent for her ancient adviser Schedoni, that she might at least have the relief of expressing her emotions, and of examining whether there remained a possibility of dissolving these long-dreaded nuptials. The frenzy of passion, however, did not so far overcome her circumspection as to compel her to acquaint the Marquise with the contents of the abyss's letter, before she had consulted with her confessor. She knew that the principles of her husband were too just upon the grand points of morality to suffer him to adopt the measures she might judge necessary, and she avoided informing him of the marriage of his son, until the means of counteracting it should have been suggested and accomplished, however desperate such means might be. Schedoni was not to be found. Trifling circumstances increased the irritation of a mind in such a state as was hers. The delay of an opportunity for unburthening her heart to Schedoni was hardly to be endured. Another and another messenger were dispatched to her confessor. "My mistress has committed some great sin, truly," said the servant, who had been twice to the convent within the last half-hour. "It must lie heavy on her conscience, in good truth, since she cannot support it for 1/2 hour. Well, the rich have this comfort, however, that, let them be ever so guilty, they can buy themselves innocent again in the twinkling of a ducat. Now a poor man might be a month before he recovered his innocence, and that too not till after many a bout of hard flogging." In the evening Schedoni came, but it was only to confirm her worst fear. He, too, had heard of the escape of Elena, as well as that she was on the lake of Salano, and was married to Vivaldi. How he obtained this information he did not choose to disclose, but he mentioned so many minute circumstances in confirmation of its truth, and appeared to be so perfectly convinced of the facts he related, that the Marchesa believed them as implicitly as himself, and her passion and despair transgressed all bounds of decorum. Schedoni observed with dark and silent pleasure the turbulent excess of her feelings, and perceived that the moment was now arrived when he might command them to his purpose, so as to render his assistance indispensable to her repose, and probably so as to accomplish the revenge he had long meditated against Vivaldi, without hazarding the favor of the Marchesa. So far was he from attempting to soothe her sufferings, that he continued to irritate her resentment and exasperate her pride, effecting this at the same time with such imperceptible art that he appeared only to be palliating the conduct of Vivaldi and endeavoring to console his distracted mother.
"This is a rash step, certainly," said the confessor, "but he is young, very young, and therefore does not foresee the consequence to which it leads. He does not perceive how seriously it will affect the dignity of his house, how much it will depreciate his consequence with the court, with the nobles of his own rank, and even with the plebeians with whom he has condescended to connect himself. Intoxicated with the passions of youth, he does not weigh the value of those blessings which wisdom and the experience of maturer age know how to estimate. He neglects them only because he does not perceive their influence in society, and that lightly to resign them is to degrade himself in the view of almost every mind. Unhappy young man, he is to be pitied fully as much as blamed."
"Your excuses, reverend father," said the tortured Marchesa, "prove the goodness of your heart, but they illustrate also the degeneracy of his mind, and detail the full extent of the effects which he has brought upon his family. It affords me no consolation to know that this degradation proceeds from his head rather than his heart. It is sufficient that he has incurred it, and that no possibility remains of throwing off the misfortune."
"Perhaps that is affirming too much," observed Schedoni.
"How, father?" said the Marchesa.
"Perhaps a possibility does remain," said he.
"Point it out to me, good father. I do not perceive it."
"Nay, my lady," replied the subtle Schedoni, correcting himself, "I am by no means assured that such possibility does exist. My solicitude for your tranquillity and for the honor of your house makes me so unwilling to relinquish hope that perhaps I only imagine a possibility in your favor. Let me consider. Alas! The misfortune, severe as it is, must be endured. There remain no means of escaping from it."
"It was cruel of you, father, to suggest a hope which you could not justify," observed the Marchesa.
"You must excuse my extreme solicitude, then," replied the confessor. "But how is it possible for me to see a family of your ancient estimation brought into such circumstances? Its honors blighted by the folly of a thoughtless boy, without feeling sorrow and indignation, and looking round for even some desperate means of delivering it from disgrace." He paused. "Disgrace!" exclaimed the Marchesa. "Father, you disgrace! The word is a strong one, but it is, alas, just. And shall we submit to this? Is it possible we can submit to it?" "There is no remedy," said Schedoni coolly. "Good God!" exclaimed the Marchesa. "That there should be no law to prevent or at least to punish such criminal marriages!" "It is much to be lamented," replied Schedoni. "The woman who obtrudes herself upon a family to dishonor it," continued the Marchesa, "deserves a punishment nearly equal to that of a state criminal, since she injures those who best support the state. She ought to suffer." "Not nearly, but quite equal," interrupted the confessor. "She deserves death." He paused, and there was a moment of profound silence, till he added, "For death can only obviate the degradation she has occasioned. Her death alone can restore the original splendor of the line she would have sullied." He paused again, but the Marchesa still remaining silent, he added, "I have often marveled that our lawgivers should have failed to perceive the justness, nay, the necessity of such punishment." "It is astonishing," said the Marchesa thoughtfully, "that a regard for their own honor did not suggest it." "Justice does not the less exist because her laws are neglected," observed Schedoni. "A sense of what she commands lives in our breasts, and when we fail to obey that sense, It is to weakness, not to virtue, that we yield." "Certainly," replied the Marchesa, "that truth never yet was doubted." "Pardon me, I am not so certain as to that," said the confessor. "When justice happens to oppose prejudice, we are apt to believe it virtuous to disobey her. For instance, though the law of justice demands the death of this girl, yet, because the law of the land forbears to enforce it, you, my daughter, even you, though possessed of a man's spirit, and has his clear perceptions, would think that virtue bade her live, when it was only fear." "Ha!" exclaimed the Marchesa in a low voice. "What is it that you mean? You shall find I have a man's courage also." "I speak without disguise," replied Schedoni. "My meaning requires none." The Marchesa mused and remained silent. "I have done my duty," resumed Schedoni at length. "I have pointed out the only way that remains for you to escape dishonor. If my zeal is displeasing, but I have done." "No, good father, no," said the Marchesa. "You mistake the cause of my emotion. New ideas, new prospects open. They confuse, they distract me. My mind has not yet attained sufficient strength to encounter them. Some woman's weakness still lingers at my heart." "Pardon my inconfidere zeal," said Schedoni, with affected humility. "I have been to blame. If yours is a weakness, it is at least an amiable one, and perhaps deserves to be encouraged rather than conquered." "How, father? If it deserves encouragement, it is not a weakness but a virtue." "Be it so," said Schedoni coolly. "The interest I have felt on this subject has, perhaps, misled my judgment, and has made me unjust. Think no more of it, or if you do, let it be only to pardon the zeal I have testified." "It does not deserve my pardon, but thanks," replied the Marchesa. "Not thanks only, but reward. Good father, I hope it will some time be in my power to prove the sincerity of my words." The confessor bowed his head. "I trust that the services you have rendered me shall be gratefully repaid, rewarded. I dare not hope for what benefit could possibly reward a service so vast as it may, perhaps, be in your power to confer upon my family. What recompense could be balanced against the benefit of having rescued the honor of an ancient house?" "Your goodness is beyond my thanks or my desert," said Schedoni, and he was again silent. The Marchesa wished him to lead her back to the point from which she herself had deviated, and he seemed determined that she should lead him thither. She mused and hesitated. Her mind was not yet familiar with atrocious guilt, and the crime which Schedoni had suggested somewhat alarmed her. She feared to think, and still more to name it, yet so acutely susceptible was her pride, so stern her indignation, and so profound her desire of vengeance, that her mind was tossed as on a tempestuous ocean, and these terrible feelings threatened to overwhelm all the residue of humanity in her heart. Schedoni observed all its progressive movements, and, like a gaunt tiger, lurked in silence, ready to spring forward at the moment of opportunity. "It is your advice, then, father," resumed the Marchesa, after a long pause, "it is your opinion that Elena—" She hesitated, desirous that Schedoni should anticipate her meaning, but he chose to spare his own delicacy rather than that of the Marchesa. "You think, then, that this insidious girl deserves—" She paused again, but the confessor, still silent, seemed to wait with submission for what the Marchesa should deliver. "I repeat, father, that it is your opinion this girl deserves severe punishment?" "Undoubtedly," replied Schedoni. "Is it not also your own?" "That not any punishment can be too severe?" continued the Marchesa, that justice equally with necessity demands her life? Is not this your opinion too? Oh, pardon me, said Schedoni. I may have erred. That only was my opinion, and when I formed it, I was probably too much under the influence of zeal to be just. When the heart is warm, how is it possible the judgment can be cool? It is not then your opinion, Holy Father, said the Marchesa with displeasure. I do not absolutely say that, replied the confessor, but I leave it to your better judgment to decide upon its justness. As he said this, he rose to depart. The Marchesa was agitated and perplexed, and requested he would stay, but he excused himself by alleging that it was the hour when he must attend a particular mass. Well then, Holy Father, I will occupy no more of your valuable moments at present, but you know how highly I estimate your advice, and will not refuse when I shall at some future time request it. I cannot refuse to accept an honor, replied the confessor, with an air of meekness. But the subject you allude to is delicate, and therefore I must value and require your opinion upon it, rejoined the Marchesa. I would wish you to value your own, replied Schedoni. You cannot have a better director. You flatter, father. I only reply, my daughter. On the evening of tomorrow, said the Marchesa gravely, I shall be at vespers in the church of San Nicolo. If you should happen to be there, you will probably see me, when the service is over and the congregation is departed, in the north cloister. We can there converse on the subject nearest my heart, and without observation. Farewell. Peace be with you, daughter, and wisdom counsel your thoughts, said Schedoni. I will not fail to visit San Nicolo. He folded his hands upon his breast, bowed his head, and left the apartment with the silent footstep that indicates weariness and conscious duplicity. The Marchesa remained in her closet, shaken by ever-varying passions and ever-fluctuating opinions, meditating misery for others, and inflicting it only upon herself.
End of Chapter 14 of The Italian. Reading by Marty Chris. Chapter 15 of The Italian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Marty Chris. The Italian by Ann Radcliffe. Chapter 15. Along the roofs sounds the low peal of death, and conscience trembles to the boding note. She views his dim form floating o'er the isles. She hears mysterious murmurs in the air, and voices, strange and potent, hint the crime that dwells in thought within her secret soul. The Marchesa repaired, according to her appointment, to the church of San Nicolo, and ordering her servants to remain with the carriage at a side door, entered the choir, attended only by her woman. When vespers had concluded, she lingered till nearly every person had quitted the choir, and then walked through the solitary aisles to the north cloister. Her heart was as heavy as her step, for when is it that peace and evil passions dwell together? As she slowly paced the cloisters, she perceived a monk passing between the pillars, who, as he approached, lifted his cowl, and she knew him to be Schedoni. He instantly observed the agitation of her spirits, and that her purpose was not yet determined according to his hope. But though his mind became clouded, his countenance remained unaltered. It was grave and thoughtful. The sternness of his vulture eye was, however, somewhat softened, and its lids were contracted by subtlety. The Marchesa bade her woman to walk apart while she conferred with her confessor. "This unhappy boy," said she, when the attendant was at some distance, "how much suffering does his folly inflict upon his family! My good father, I have need of all your advice and consolation. My mind is perpetually haunted by a sense of my misfortune. It has no respite. Awake or in my dream, this ungrateful son alike pursues me. The only relief my heart receives is when conversing with you, my only counselor, my only disinterested friend." The confessor bowed. "The Marquise is no doubt equally afflicted with yourself," said he, "but he is notwithstanding much more competent to advise you on this delicate subject than I am." "The Marquise has prejudices, father, as you well know. He is a sensible man, but he is sometimes mistaken, and he is incorrigible in error. He has the faults of a mind that is merely well disposed. He is destitute of the discernment and the energy which would make it great. If it is necessary to adopt a conduct that departs in the smallest degrees from those common rules of morality which he has cherished without examining them from his infancy, he is shocked and shrinks from action. He cannot discriminate the circumstances that render the same action virtuous or vicious. How then, father, are we to suppose he would approve of the bold inflictions we meditate?" "Most true," said the artful Schedoni, with an air of admiration. "We therefore must not consult him," continued the Marchesa, "lest he should now as formally advance and maintain objections to which we cannot yield. What passes in conversation with you, father, is sacred and goes no farther." "Sacred as a confession," said Schedoni, crossing himself. "I know not," resumed the Marchesa, and hesitated. "I know not," she repeated in a yet lower voice, "how this girl may be disposed of, and this it is which distracts my mind." "I marvel much at that," said Schedoni. "With opinions so singularly just, with a mind so accurate, yet so bold as you have displayed, is it possible that you can hesitate as to what is to be done? You, my daughter, will not prove yourself one of those ineffectual disclaimers who can think vigorously but cannot act so. One way only remains for you to pursue in the present instance. It is the same which your superior sagacity pointed out, and taught me to approve. Is it necessary for me to persuade her, by whom I am convinced? There is only one way." "And on that I have been long meditating," replied the Marchesa. "And shall I own my weakness? I cannot yet decide." "My daughter,
Can it be possible that you should want courage to soar above vulgar prejudice, in action though not in opinion?
Said Schedoni, who, perceiving that his assistance was necessary to fix her fluctuating mind, gradually began to steal forth from the prudent reserve in which he had taken shelter.
If this person was condemned by the law, he continued, you would pronounce her sentence to be just. Yet you dare not, I am humbled while I repeat it, you dare not dispense justice yourself.
The Marchesa, after some hesitation, said, I have not the shield of the law to protect me, father, and the boldest virtue may pause when it reaches the utmost verge of safety.
Never, replied the confessor warmly. Virtue never trembles. It is her glory and sublimest attribute to be superior to danger, to despise it. The best principle is not virtue till it reaches this elevation.
A philosopher might perhaps have been surprised to hear two persons seriously defining the limits of virtue at the very moment in which they meditated the most atrocious crime. A man of the world would have considered it to be mere hypocrisy, a supposition which might have disclosed his general knowledge of manners, but would certainly have betrayed his ignorance of the human heart. The Marchesa was for some time silent and thoughtful, and then repeated deliberately, I have not the shield of the law to protect me.
But you have the shield of the church, replied Schedoni. You should not only have protection, but absolution.
Absolution? Does virtue, justice require absolution, father?
When I mentioned absolution for the action which you perceive to be so just and necessary, replied Schedoni, I accommodated my speech to vulgar prejudice and to vulgar weakness. And forgive me that since you, my daughter, descended from the loftiness of your spirit to regret the shield of the law, I endeavor to console you by offering a shield to conscience. But enough of this. Let us return to argument. This girl is put out of the way of committing more mischief, of injuring the peace and dignity of a distinguished family. She is sent to an eternal sleep before her time. Where is the crime? Where is the evil of this? On the contrary, you perceive, and you have convinced me, that it is only strict justice, only self-defense.
The Marchesa was attentive, and the confessor added,
She is not immortal, and the few years more that might have been allotted her, she deserves to forfeit, since she would have employed them in cankering the honor of an illustrious house.
Speak low, father, said the Marchesa, though he spoke almost in a whisper. The cloister appears solitary, yet some person may lurk behind those pillars. Advise me how this business may be managed. I am ignorant of the particular means.
There is some hazard in the accomplishment of it, I grant, replied Schedoni. I know not whom you may confide in. The men who make a trade of blood. Hush, said the Marchesa, looking around through the twilight. A step. It is the friars yonder who crosses to the choir, replied Schedoni. They were watchful for a few moments, and then he resumed the subject. Mercenaries ought not to be trusted.
Yet who but mercenaries? Interrupted the Marchesa, and instantly checked herself. But the question thus implied did not escape the confessor.
Pardon my astonishment, said he, at the inconsistency, or what shall I venture to call it, of your opinions. After the acuteness you have displayed on some points, is it possible you can doubt that principle may both prompt and perform the deed? Why should we hesitate to do what we judge to be right? Ah, reverend father, said the Marchesa with emotion, but where shall we find another like yourself, another who not only can perceive with justness, but will act with energy? Schedoni was silent. Such a friend is above all estimation, but where shall we seek him? Daughter, said the monk empathetically, my zeal for your family is also above all calculation. Good father, replied the Marchesa, comprehending his full meaning, I know not how to thank you. Silence is sometimes eloquence, said Schedoni significantly. The Marchesa mused, for her conscience also was eloquent. She tried to overcome its voice, but it would be heard, and sometimes such starts of horrible conviction came over her mind that she felt as one who, awakening from a dream, opens his eyes only to measure the depth of the precipice on which he totters. In such moments she was astonished that she had paused for an instant upon a subject so terrible as that of murder. The sophistry of the confessor, together with the inconsistencies which he had betrayed, and which had not escaped the notice of the Marchesa, even at the time they were uttered, though she had been unconscious of her own, then became more strongly apparent, and she almost determined to suffer the poor Elena to live. But returning passion, like a wave that has recoiled from the shore, afterwards came with recollected energy, and swept from her feeble mind the barriers which reason and conscience had begun to rear. This confidence with which you have thought proper to honor me, said Schedoni at length, and paused. This affair so momentous. Aye, this affair, interrupted the Marchesa in a hurried manner. But when and where, good father? Being once convinced, I am anxious to have it settled. That must be as occasion offers, replied the monk thoughtfully. On the shore of the Adriatic, in the province of Apulia, not far from Manfredonia, is a house that might suit the purpose. It is a lone dwelling on the beach, and concealed from travellers among the forests which spread for many miles along the coast. And the people? said the Marchesa. Ay, daughter, or why travel so far as Apulia? It is inhabited by one poor man who sustains a miserable existence by fishing. I know him, and could unfold the reasons of his solitary life, but no matter. It is sufficient that I know him. And would trust him, father? Ay, lady, with the life of this girl, though scarcely with my own. How, if he is such a villain, he may not be trusted? Think further. But now you objected to a mercenary, yet this man is one. Daughter, he may be trusted when it is in such a case. He is safe and sure. I have reason to know him. Name your reasons, father. The confessor was silent, and his countenance assumed a very peculiar character. It was more terrible than usual, and overspread with a dark, cadaverous hue of mingled anger and guilt. The Marchesa started involuntarily as, passing by a window, the evening gleam that fell there discovered it, and for the first time she wished that she had not committed herself so wholly to his power. But the die was now cast. It was too late to be prudent, and she again demanded his reasons. No matter, said Schedoni in a stifled voice. She dies. By his hands? asked the Marchesa with strong emotion. Think once more, father. They were both again silent and thoughtful. The Marchesa at length said, Father, I rely upon your integrity and prudence, and she laid a very flattering emphasis upon the word integrity. But I conjure you to let this business be finished quickly. Suspense is to me the purgatory of this world, and not to trust the accomplishment of it to a second person. She paused, and then added, I would not willingly owe so vast a debt of obligation to any other than yourself. Your request, daughter, that I would not confide this business to a second person, said Skidoni with displeasure, cannot be accorded to. Can you suppose that I myself, can I doubt that principle may both be prompt and perform the deed? Interrupted the Marchesa with quickness, and anticipating his meaning, while she retorted upon him his former words. Why should we hesitate to do what we judge to be right? The silence of Skidoni alone indicated his displeasure, which the Marchesa immediately understood. Consider, good father, she added significantly, how painful it must be to me to owe to infinite an obligation to a stranger or to any other than so highly valued a friend as yourself. Skidoni, while he detected her meaning, and persuaded himself that he despised the flattery with which she so thinly veiled it, unconsciously suffered his self-love to be soothed by the compliment. He bowed his head in signal of consent to her wish. Avoid violence, if that be possible, she added, immediately comprehending him, but let her die quickly. The punishment is due to the crime. The Marchesa happened, as she said this, to cast her eyes upon the inscription over a confessional, where appeared in black letters these awful words, God hears thee. It appeared an awful warning. Her countenance changed. It had struck upon her heart. Skidoni was too much engaged by his own thoughts to observe or understand her silence. She soon recovered herself, and considering that this was a common inscription for confessionals, disregarded what she had at first considered as a peculiar admonition. Yet some moments elapsed before she could renew the subject. You were speaking of a place, father, resumed the Marchesa. You mentioned Aye, muttered the confessor, still musing. In a chamber of that house there is— What noise is that? Said the Marchesa, interrupting him. They listened. A few low and querulous notes of the organ sounded at a distance and stopped again. What mournful music is that? Said the Marchesa in a faltering voice. It was touched by a fearful hand. Vespers were over long ago. Daughter, said Skidoni somewhat sternly, you said you had a man's courage. At last you have a woman's heart. Excuse me, father. I know not why I feel this agitation, but I will command it. What chamber? In that chamber, resumed the confessor, is a secret door, constructed long ago. And for what purpose constructed? Said the fearful Marchesa. Pardon me, daughter. It's sufficient that it is there. We will make a good use of it. Through that door, in the night, when she sleeps— I comprehend you, said the Marchesa. I comprehend you, but why? You have your reasons, no doubt, but why the necessity of a secret door in a house which you say is so lonely, inhabited by only one person? A passage leads to the sea, continued Skidoni, without replying to the question. There on the shore, when darkness covers it, there, plunged amidst the waves, no stain shall hint of— Hark! interrupted the Marchesa, starting. That note again! The organ sounded faintly from the choir, and paused as before. In the next moment a slow chaunting of voices was heard, mingling with the rising peal in a strain particularly melancholy and solemn. Who is dead? Said the Marchesa, changing countenance. It is a requiem. Peace be with the departed, exclaimed Skidoni, and crossed himself. Peace rest with his soul. Hark to that chant, said the Marchesa in a trembling voice. It is a first requiem. The soul has but just quitted the body. They listened in silence. The Marchesa was much affected. Her complexion varied at every instant. Her breathings were short and interrupted, and she even shed a few tears, but they were those of despair rather than of sorrow. That body is now cold, said she to herself, but an hour ago it was warm and animated.
Those fine senses are closed in death, and to this condition would I reduce a being like myself. O wretched, wretched mother! To what has the folly of a son reduced thee?" She turned from the confessor, and walked alone in the cloister. Her agitation increased. She wept without restraint, for her veil and the evening gloom concealed her, and her sighs were lost amidst the music of the choir. Schedoni was scarcely less disturbed, but his were emotions of apprehension and contempt. "Behold, what is woman," said he, "the slave of her passions, the dupe of her senses. When pride and revenge speak in her breast, she defies obstacles and laughs at crimes. Assail but her senses, let music, for instance, touch some feeble chord of her heart, and echo to her fancy, and lo! all her perceptions change. She shrinks from the act she had but an instant before believed meritorious, yields to some new emotion, and sinks, the victim of a sound. O weak and contemptible being!" The Marchesa at least seemed to justify his observations. The desperate passions which had resisted every remonstrance of reason and humanity were vanquished only by other passions, and her senses touched by the mournful melody of music, and her superstitious fears awakened by the occurrence of a requiem for the dead. At the very moment when she was planning murder, she yielded for a while to the united influence of pity and terror. Her agitation did not subside, but she returned to the confessor. "We will converse on this business at some future time," said she. "At present my spirits are disordered. Good night, father. Remember me in your orisons." "Peace be with you, lady," said the confessor, bowing gravely. "You shall not be forgotten. Be resolute, and yourself." The Marchesa beckoned her woman to approach, when, drawing her veil closer, and leaning upon the attendant's arm, she left the cloister. Schedoni remained for a moment on the spot, looking after her till her figure was lost in the gloom of the long perspective. He then, with thoughtful steps, quitted the cloister by another door. He was disappointed, but he did not despair. End of Chapter 15 of The Italian. Reading by Marty Chris.